wind moaned low across the flats when they first saw it. A cabin set at a deliberate tilt, roof slung crooked, eaves drooping like a tired mule. Men laughed into their tin cups. Women whispered it would skid off its own foundation. He said nothing, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. He sank the corner post deeper, lined his walls with riverstone, and hung a door that seemed wrong by every rule they knew. When the worst winter in living memory clawed down the valley, their chimneys screamed and their planks split. His? The smoke rose easy, the frost never bit, and the air inside held steady as a held breath. Warm, steady. 65 by feel, if not by any clock. Out here, the winter took what it wanted. It took cattle first, then fences, then sense. It crept into boots and gnawed the toes raw. It split green logs with a dry crack. The frontier rewarded survival, not mercy, and mercy didn't burn. Men wrapped blankets around blankets. Women stuffed moss in sash gaps and prayed the wind would choose some other eve to worry. The cold pressed in with iron palms and made the walls ring like a struck anvil. By the time the creek sealed, snow climbed past the sillboards. Stoves drank wood faster than axes could feed them. Smoke backed up when the air settled heavy and mean, the kind of inversion that pinned a man's breath to the floor. You could hear roofs complain in the night, the long, slow sigh of wet shingles freezing, thawing, swelling, and failing. Frost worked down the nails, found the iron, and made a white flour there that never melted. Bread rose lopsided. Babies coughed. The cow's milk tasted of cold. Against that, he set his tilt like a man sets his back to the wind. They called it foolish. He didn't argue facts with weather. He watched it. He knew wind loves a flat face and hates a broken line. So he gave it one. He turned the roof to catch the north gust and slide it off like water off slate. He dropped one corner into the earth until the sill met packed clay and the post drank from frostless ground. Inside, he laid a stone trench under the plank walk, a gut running from the hearth to the low corner. The fire filled it with quiet heat. The heat rose slow. A house warms best when it warms the bones first. The door swung strange, not centered, hung against the lean with a lip. The wind hit, hunted a seam, and found the seam slippery. It bent around and slid by, like a coyote spooked from a snare. He cut his window small and off-square beneath the eave that took the brood of the gale, so pressure would pass rather than punch. He stuffed chink with clay and grass, then pinned split willow over it. Not pretty, but tough, like old scar tissue. Night fell, and with it the hard cold. The town's straight houses stood up proud and suffered for it. Smoke stalled in throats of chimneys drawn dead plumb. Ash bulged and spilled. Sparks bit rafters. Men climbed ladders with wet sacks. Noses bled. The wind found each seam and practiced on it, like a knife on leather, until it cut through. Frost crept along floorboards, brittle as sugar. Water jugs cracked. Axe handles snapped. His place hummed. Outside, the eave beat a hollow rhythm. Inside, the kettle never needed coaxing. The floor gave back a little warmth to bare feet, dull and constant. Not hot. Enough. He fed the fire with a measured hand and listened to the draw. Soft, steady, no backstep in the flame. The lean of the flue took the burden off the throat in dead air. Smoke clung to the slant and climbed. Neighbors came quiet, hats in hand, shame tucked under coats. They held to his wall and felt nothing of the outside on the inside of their palms. No sting. They stepped in and breathed steam, their beards wetting and thawing. One woman pressed her cheek to the stone bench he'd set along the trench and closed her eyes. A boy set his boots near the low vent, toes pointed in, and watched his breath vanish. They still called it crooked. They stopped laughing. The frontier had a memory. It remembered who listened to it, and it rewarded that, not with comfort, with survival. They called him Elias Thorn, because a thorn bothers what won't bend. He came up the valley with a rein mare and a sled of oddments, river stones stacked like loaves, willow bundles, a coil of stovepipe curved instead of straight, and a door already hung in its jamb, though no walls waited for it. He spoke little. When he did, his words landed plain and stayed put. He had the look of a man sanded down by weather, edges left where they served, the rest worn smooth. He'd worked timberlines before rail came near them, watched avalanches teach the same lesson twice to men who wouldn't listen once. He'd slept in dugouts where frost could not find the earth's steady heart. He knew wind by its footsteps and snow by its smell. The wind moaned low, and he'd close his eyes and count, then nod like he'd heard a familiar voice. The town watched and felt mocked by his silence. He paid for his corner with labor, not talk, helped raise other men's straight frames, and made no comment when their sills rattled like loose teeth. He set his own posts with a mason's patience, turning grain to meet strain, twisting saddle notches a hair off true so weight would lock. When a man asked why the skew, Elias tapped the log. "A straight line's a dare," he said. "The world takes it." The remark irritated like grit in a cuff. Past his habit of quiet, there was the way he measured. He'd squat under eaves and cup the air like water, feeling for movement, not chill. He'd pinch the brim of his hat off to one side and watch smoke travel the brim's lee. He marked shallow trenches with the toe of his boot, then changed them by a hand's width, as if listening to something underfoot. To him, the ground was not dead. It held a slow pulse. He built to it. He learned from failure the way a blacksmith learns heat, by burns that heal into instruction. Years back, a cabin he framed for a trapper took rot at the base not from rain, but from breath, trapped and turned to water against cold boards. Elias opened a path under the floor this time, laid stone to drink and give back, made a gut to carry warmth like a body does. He ruined 2 flues in his life by pride. The third, he set to climb on lean, asking help from rising air rather than daring it to fight through stillness. The town's mockers wore their laughter like armor. They'd lean their elbows on fence rails and spit judgments into the dust. "Looks drunk," one said, eyeing Elias's roofline. Elias looked up, eyes narrowed. "Sober houses freeze," he answered. Not cruel, just true. The weight of his words settled heavy. They didn't forgive that. Children liked him. He'd whistle low and a magpie would come near, curious. He'd hand a boy a wedge and show him the angle that enters grain without waste. He'd let a girl find the warm seam along that stone bench and tell her, "Heat's a quiet traveler. Give it a road." He carried loss like a man carries water, balanced, careful, necessary. Folks whispered about a wife buried upriver, a roof that fell under a thick spring, a grave cut when the ground was still iron. He never spoke her name, but when he set that odd door, lip to the wind, you could tell he was done asking weather for mercy. He would bargain with it, on terms he understood. He chose tilt because tilt is how mountains stand after all their straight edges crumble. He trusted what lasted. And when the first grip of cold reached down the valley that year, Elias Thorn stood in his crooked doorway and watched it come like a man who'd made his peace with his enemy by learning its language. Fair to the compass, proud to the eye, everything plumb enough to draw a string along and sing about it. They set sills on stones barely tamped, trusting weight to find level. They raised 4 walls in a day with neighbors cheering, corners saddled tight as knuckles, gaps stuffed quick with moss. A roof came next, ridge true as a gun barrel, rafters mirrored like twins. It looked right. That was its doom. A straight wall invites a straight wind. Winter, pleased with that courtesy, hit those facades like a bull on a red gate. The blast hammered broadside, piled pressure, and hunted weakness along a single plane. Where the clapboard sat proud, the gale found a thumbhold. Where the chink ran even, it pried like a wedge. Inside, drafts braided and snapped, a constant under the stoves, chimneys rose dead vertical because a man's pride likes a line that doesn't flinch. But a plum throat in a valley inversion draws like a tired mule. Cold air sinks, smoke seeks the low road. The two meet and argue till soot coats the argument black. The first still night after a hard snap, straight flues sulked. Fires, back, sparks spilled, and men learned the taste of panic on ladders slick with rime. Floors floated above raw crawl space, air open and mean. A winter ground gives nothing unless asked with respect. They left it empty beneath their boards, so the cold gathered there like water in a pan, pooled heavy, and seeped up through seams. A baby's blanket could not outvote a floor that drank heat faster than any stove could pay. They put their doors at center because a house ought to greet the world square. Center cuts a body line into a bellows, wind in, wind out. A gust hit their proud face, rushed through the sweetest path, the new straight sash lines, and took the warmth with it. They added second latches and quilts tacked to lintels. The quilts grew stiff with frost. The latches squealed in the night. Windows, they loved them. Two opposite, big enough to see a team coming a mile off. Big enough for a bile-green prairie sky to stare back. Opposing panes make a flute. The land plays it. Pressure differences set a house humming, joints rattle, smoke wanders, lamps gutter. They called it the devil's breath. The devil called it physics. Roofs, proud-ridged and even-pitched, took snow like a ledger takes numbers, each flake recorded, nothing forgiven. In a thaw-snap-thaw, that weight turned sly. Water crept under shingles, met nail iron, froze, and levered. The next wind lifted rows like scales and drove crystals into the batting. Come night, rafters groaned, and the ridge complained in a voice like an old rope under a stubborn load. They set sills high on stones, tidy and dry, except the wind loves a clean underside. It chewed at that edge and made music of it, a moan that stole sleep and courage. They stuffed more moss. The moss held water. Water turned to glass. The glass cracked the seam wide enough to whisper through. A whisper of winter is all winter needs. They built with their eyes. Winter works by touch. Elias didn't draw plans. He walked the land until the wind told him where to stand. Then he set his heel and marked a line that refused the gale rather than met it. The tilt began there. House canted 5 degrees off plumb. Roofline shouldered into the north like a bull meeting a snowdrift. Men called it crooked. Elias called it kind. A house that yields a little doesn't break. He gave the wind a slope, not a wall. The north eave ran low and heavy, the south high and clean. When the hard breath came down the valley, it struck the low shoulder and broke into strands, pressure sliding instead of piling. The lean turned a roar into a brush of fingers. Board stopped shuddering. Chink stopped prying loose. Inside, the flame steadied, the lamp glass cleared. Underfoot he laid the house's secret. A trench of river stone, course after course, ran beneath the floor like a hidden spine. He called it the gut. By day, the hearth poured warmth into that rock. By night, the rock gave it back. The slow release that keeps bones from aching and water from scumming with ice. He bedded the trench below the frost line, where earth keeps her own counsel at a steady cool, so the heat had something to press against and balance. Warmth doesn't rush there. It settles, then rises in a mild breath through a finger's width of gap along the board edges. Bare feet learned the path first, then the lungs did. The flu confounded folks most. Instead of a proud, straight throat, he lifted the chimney with a quiet lean, same way smoke climbs a hillside of its choosing. "Smoke's lazy," he said once, jaw tight. "Let it follow its favorite road." In dead air, when every straight pipe in town sulked and sent its soot back home, his slanted run kept draft alive. The angle built a pressure difference of its own, a gentler pull that didn't need the sky's help. Doors and windows carried that same contrariness. The door stood off-center, hung against the lean with a lip he'd carved like a wave's edge. Wind hit, felt for purchase, lost interest. The latch never iced. The little window under the burdened eave sat off square, so Gus couldn't drum a perfect beat on the sash. He faced no two openings at each other. A house is a lung, he'd tell a child. Don't cut it into a whistle. He skinned the north wall different. Over chinked clay and grass, he laid a woven willow shield, pinned tight, then daubed a thin wash of mud and ash. Not pretty, tough. It flexed. When ice found it, the weave took the bite and shed it, the way a willow gives to flood and springs back. On the south, he left the logs to drink sun. The lean gave that wall more noon. In thaw, when other cabins wept into themselves, his dried like a horse in warm wind. Foundations, the settlers' love stones stacked neat and high. Elias favored earth. He dropped his low corner until sill kissed packed clay, bored vents at the opposite edge, then skirted the gap with rough planks set close and slanted. The wind that tried to gnaw under met an angled throat and moved on. The space beneath turned from a thief to a buffer, a pocket where air changed slow. Folks asked why he'd trust tilt. He didn't answer with pride. He answered with weather. Mountains aren't square, ridges lean, snow slides where you show it a path. A house that stands long out here learns from the land that never fell. He listened, then built what he'd heard. And when winter came hunting, the tilt did what it was born for. It turned force into flow, cold into quiet. He broke ground the day the cottonwoods let go their last leaves. The wind swept the flats with a lonely whistle, carrying sawdust and gossip alike. Elias set a line, then ignored it by a thumb's width, shouldering posts into augured holes until they bit the cold earth and held. He tamped with a hickory maul, rhythm steady, not a wasted blow. The trench for the gut took shape first, stone on stone, river wet and round, stacked with a mason's stubborn patience. He laid it like he'd lay truth, low, unseen, impossible to argue with once it settled. Men leaned on their bridles and smirked. "You building a cellar for snakes?" one called. Elias kept his jaw tight. "For heat," he said. "Snakes take care of themselves." The weight of his words settled heavy. The smirk thinned but did not leave. A boy counted his hammer strokes under his breath and got lost when Elias changed cadence for a bad knot and read the grain like script. He scribed notches off true, saddles cocked a whisper, so the logs locked and couldn't creep when frost flexed the valley. That skew set tongues wagging harder than the lean. "Won't square," they said. "Won't stand," they said. "It'll twist like a calf in a wire." Elias ran his palm along a notch, as if calming a skittish animal. "It'll hold," he said. He drove a peg with a single, calm hit. The peg sang. The string of mockery frayed. The roof went up sullen to the eye, north eave heavy and low, south edge light and quick. He feathered shingles off the shoulder, not in perfect rows, but in a pattern that broke the wind's appetite for rhythm. It offended tidy men. A millwright named Pike spat. "Ugly's a kind of sin." Elias lifted an eyebrow, eyes narrowed. "Cold don't confess." He hung the door on a raw morning, frost lifting out of grass like breath. The jamb leaned with the frame's intentional slant. The lip he carved met the prevailing gust like a wrestler's shoulder. From a distance, it looked wrong as a limp. From an arm's length, the fit was so clean a hair would not pass. Women who knew seams watched longer than their husbands did. "It shuts easy," one murmured, almost against her own will. He skinned the north wall with woven willow under a smear of mud and ash, hands moving in a practiced braid. The willow flexed and whispered. "You painting your house with the river?" Pike jeered. Elias dabbed another pass, thin, careful. "I'm giving it memory," he said. "Wood forgets. Willow remembers flood and leans. Then it stands." He didn't look up to see if anyone heard. Then came the waiting, because every build out here answers to weather's clock. He packed the gut with warmth for the first time, banked a fire, let the stones drink, closed his eyes, listened to the draw along the quiet lean of flue. The flame neither coughed nor raced. It breathed. Snow tested the stringers with a first skiff, then a proper coat. Men came by to measure with their eyes. "Still standing," Pike said, like a gambler testing his luck. Elias shrugged. "Not the storm yet." He hauled split rounds and stacked them low and wide, a cordage that would not tip when wind shouldered it. He counted his wood not in rows but in nights. Rumor worked as hard as his hands. A handful swore the sill had sunk. Another handful swore he'd packed it with some trick. Children reached to touch the south wall at noon and jerked back, surprised by sun warmth. He watched the sky, jaw tight, reading high streamers, the halo on the pale moon, the way ravens rode a distant ridge without flapping. 3 blows, he said softly to no one. Then the one that matters. By then the town had decided on its pleasure, to stand back, to wait for tilt to fail. The frontier was never kind, but it was patient in its meanness. They sharpened their laughter like knives and tucked them away, ready for the first creak that sounded like regret. Elias checked his latches, walked the eaves, and laid another stone in the gut. He didn't pray. He prepared. The first blow rode in on a blue norther with a knife-edge front. Cattle turned their backs to it and tucked their noses into ribs. Smoke flattened along rooftops and then snapped upward as the gusts spilled by in sheets. Men swore at latches that iced in a breath. The creek, which had gone to iron in an honest freeze many times before, took this new cold like a command. It did not seal, it locked. Sound died along it. By evening the wind had a voice like a saw in green bone. Straight houses took the music and made it worse. Their ridges whistled, their corners howled. Elias's lean shouldered the gale, broke it into shreds. Snow hit his north eave, gathered, thought better of it, and slipped. The willow skin flexed. The ash wash showed white teeth of rime and shed them. Inside he banked the hearth and listened. The gut drank deep. Heat settled into stone the way a good truth finds its place and stays. The floor warmed by degrees, not drama. Ankle bones first, then calves. He held his palm to the low vent and felt a slow breath, warm enough to count as mercy. He didn't smile. He nodded once, jaw tight, as if an old bargain had been honored. At midnight, Pike's chimney coughed fire. The plum throat sulked under the inversion, soot pasted in the elbow like grief. Pike's wife beat sparks with a wet sack until steam boiled from the cloth and froze into brittle lace. Rafters took the heat, then the cold, and sighed like men whipped. 2 houses over, a sash blew, and a blanket pinned over it went stiff with rime where it met the frame. Babies woke with the wheeze that sets a mother trembling. Elias's flue drew on its lean, smoke following the favorite road up the slant. The flame neither licked for air nor crawled for lack, it breathed. A hairline drift built at the door lip, discovered it had no seam to eat, and slumped. The lamp glass cleared. The kettle muttered like an old friend with nothing urgent to say. Day broke hard and stingy, light the color of pewter. The second blow chased the first without a day's grace. Snow came fine as flour and drove level. It sought gaps and found them where men had sworn there were none. Sills that had looked tight as a seal in fair weather lifted to the cold like a scab to a fingernail. Moss drank and turned to glass, glass wedged and pride seams opened. In one proud house, a broom straw under the door danced straight out. Elias walked his eaves slow, glove tapping the willow shield, listening to the note. He kicked the south wall with a boot heel and felt sun warming where no sun could be seen. He fed the fire with counted sticks and set a pot near the low vent. Steam rose lazy. He knelt and laid a hand on the gut stones through the floor seam and closed his eyes. The heat there was steady, not a surge. A house warms best when it does not boast. The third blow was ice, not wind, not snow, ice that crept out of air like a fief and took hinges, took beard hair, took courage. Chimneys rhymed shut. Men climbed with hatchets and found their breath too heavy to lift. Hooks snapped. Ropes turned to iron snakes. Horses bled from the nose for the insult of it. That night they came. Not all, not at once. The proud stayed and coughed and cursed. But a line formed in the dark, shoulders hunched, lanterns hooded. They stamped the drift at Elias's doorstep and stood like men at a doctor's door. He opened without surprise. Heat breathed out and met their shame with indifference. Pike went last. He took the jam in his hand and froze. The wood was not cold, it was simply wood. He looked at Elias, eyes narrowed, something wounded there. "How warm?" he asked, voice sanded down. Elias shrugged. "Warm enough." He backed away and left them room. They filed in. Boots set to that low vent, toes in. Women put their palms to the stone bench and closed their eyes. A child's cough softened to a sleep sound. Someone whispered a number, 65, as if naming a saint. Elias stirred the pot and said nothing. Outside, the wind moaned low and passed his eave like water over rock. Inside, the weight of his words settled heavy without being spoken. They didn't believe the number at first. Numbers belonged to surveyors and railroad men, not to folks with frost in their beards. But you can count without a clock. The air on your teeth says more than any gauge. In that lean-boned room, the breath of 20 souls rose, turned to nothing, and stayed gone. The kettle muttered at a slow, content bubble. A woman unbuttoned her boy's coat and didn't shiver. That's how the truth measured itself. Pike, who had sharpened his laughter to a knife, held his palms out and waited for the bite that never came. His hands, raw from ladder rungs and split wood, pinked up and stopped hurting. He looked to the window, off square under the burdened eave, and saw no feather of rime creeping on the pane. His jaw worked. He didn't speak. The weight of what he'd said in fair weather pushed back at him like a loaded door. Elias gave them the room and the silence. He moved the iron with 2 fingers, not a flourish, laid a new stick like a careful word, and let the gut drink. Heat rose up through the thin seam at the board edge and found ankles, then knees. A girl curled her toes and smiled into her sleeve. "Feels like Ma's bread," she whispered, and somebody choked on that, for want and for memory. A man with a cough like a kicked stove tried the door latch out of habit. It lifted free and settled back easy as a trout in quiet water. No crust, no sting. He lifted it again, twice, because disbelief is a kind of cold, too. The latch answered both times with the same calm. Outside, the storm tested the north shoulder and slid, its anger broken into 1,000 small disappointments. The roof beat a hollow rhythm. The willow skin shivered and forgot the blow. Inside, the flame breathed steady on its leaning road, and not one lamp guttered. The house did what Elias had asked of it. It turned force into flow. Pike found his voice like a man picking up a dropped tool. "This ain't luck," he said low. "This is contrived." The word felt strange in his mouth. Elias nodded once. "Built to," he answered. He knelt, set his palm to the floor seam, and tapped the board with 2 fingers. "Bones first," he said, "then skin." A woman who'd pressed her cheek to the stone bench lifted her head slow, color back under her eyes. 65, she said, not to brag, not to plead, just naming what the body knew. Another woman gave a small, disbelieving laugh that turned to something softer. "In January," she said, and shook her head at the blasphemy and the grace of it. They took off mittens, they loosened scarves, they let their backs unlock. Shame has a temperature too, it cooled, just enough to bear. No one spoke apology. The frontier didn't trade in that currency. But there are other payments. Pike's hat came off and stayed off. He stood with it gripped to his ribs like a man at a graveside who finally hears the preacher right. Elias boiled water and handed tin cups without ceremony. "Sip," he said, "don't chase it." He looked at each face, saw the thaw working, the blood coming back, the mind starting to move again. "You'll need to tend your chimneys at daylight," he told Pike. "Break the rime from the lip and set your stove back till your flue draws. And cut a slip under your door. Don't make a whistle of your house." Pike swallowed, eyes narrowed, the old fight gone out of them. "Show me in the morning," he said. Not a question. Not an order. A thing like a plea that didn't ask for mercy. Elias nodded once. "Daylight," he said. They slept on his floor in spells, boots braced at the warm lip, heads tipped against the honest tilt of the wall. The storm hammered its anger down to a steady moan and then, obedient to the land's larger lean, moved on. When gray bled toward pale, Elias opened the door. No crust trapped it. No scream of nails. Just a house that had learned the weather's language and spoken back in a steady voice. Outside, the drifts had curled and slipped from his eaves. Inside, the air stayed what a body could bear, proof enough to make a proud man quiet and a quiet man remembered. The land teaches physics in plain clothes. Elias didn't name it, but his hands understood it. The tilt turned wind from pressure into flow, yet that was only half the truth. The other half rode the sun. Winter sun runs low, skimming the southern rim like a tired rider. A straight, proud wall wastes that angle. Elias gave the south face more noon, lifted eve, cleaner line, so light fell deep into the room when the day was shortest. The logs drank it. Dark grain turns light into a quiet heat, the way a black coat warms a back in January. The lean set the south wall to catch and the north to shield. That is passive solar, though Elias never said the words. Then there was the gut, the stone trench laid below the bite of frost. Stone has a memory like riverbed. It forgets fast heat and keeps the slow kind. Daylight and fire filled those rounded backs with warmth. Night drew it out on its own schedule. That lag, men in cities call it thermal mass, kept the air from lurching hot, then air moves for reasons that never change. Hot rises, cold sinks. Pressure hunts balance. A plum chimney in a dead calm begs the sky to do the pulling. Elias's lean set a preferred road. Warm flue gases slid along that slant like a sled on packed snow, building draft without asking favor from a sullen wind. That small angle made a small pressure, enough. The door lip, carved like a wave, turned a gust from a battering ram into a slipstream. The off-square window refused resonance. No devil's flute, no drumbeat on the sash. He broke symmetry on purpose. Symmetry pleases the eye and enrages the wind. Moisture kills slow. Breath condenses on the first cold surface it finds. In the straight houses, that was the floor and the inner faces of plumb pipes. Water turned to glass and pried seams. Elias lowered Cold's places to the crawl pocket he tamed, vented opposite, skirted with slant, so air moved through there without teeth. The willow shield on the north wall flexed and shed rime. Ash and mud took the first bite and let the log behind stay temperate. Layers, each doing one job: break, buffer, breathe. That is what keeps rot from starting its quiet work. Snow is a cunning enemy. It adds weight when a ridge invites it, and water when a thaw flatters it. The eave shoulder he set low took the blow and slid it. Shingle courses staggered, not marching in proud ranks, denied ice the clean line it loves to lift. The roof beat a hollow rhythm, yes, but the beat meant movement. A house that moves a little, by give, by pattern, by plan, does not fail when the world presses. Call it passive solar, call it pressure management, call it thermal mass and moisture control. Elias called it listening. He read the arc of the sun, the footstep of wind, the slow pulse of earth, and answered with lean, stone, shield, and seam. The frontier rewards what works. The names come later. When spring unbuttoned the valley, men straightened less and asked more. Pike cut his chimney with a whisper of lean. Women pinned willow under north eaves and didn't care if it looked like river work. Children laid their palms to floors and learned what quiet heat feels like. Elias said little. He mended his sled traces and planted beans along the warm south wall. His legacy isn't a shrine. It's a handful of rules that never age. Face your noon and shelter your night. Give wind a slope, not a dare. Put your heat in the bones and let it travel a road. Break symmetry where pressure loves perfection. Keep the first bite of cold outside the skin. Modern folk dress the same truths in new clothes: masonry heaters, trombe walls, earth tubes under slab, vented rain screens, airtight doors with pressure lips. They run numbers, the numbers agree. South Glass earns its keep when shaded in summer and opened in winter. Mass stores, lean draws, Willow, now fiber, membrane, and gap, still remembers how to flex and shed. Elias Thorne's crooked doorway is gone. The wind swept, the grass grew back. But the tilt remains wherever a builder listens first. The frontier was never kind, only consistent. If you want a house to stand warm through a hard season, learn the land's language and speak it plain. The door clicked shut behind him. There was no going back now. If you want to see more hard-earned frontier craft turned into living shelter, subscribe and ride with us to the next story.